think we are good to go. Close that out. Hello, beautifuls. It's wonderful to see you this evening. This Valentine's Day evening, I have been finding myself, well, first off, for those of you who don't know me, hi, my name's Rainey Ford, and I am Mountain Woman Medicine, and I am part of Nematon, a nonprofit located in New York. And we are all about discovering what it is to be in good relationship with ourselves and each other, as well as what it is to hold space and hold sanctuary for what it is that is present in the world around us, what is alive and present. So this evening, I felt drawn to come in and share a section of a chapter of a book, of one of the seed books that I am currently in the middle of writing, organizing, collecting, collaborating with. And the topic tonight that I'd love to walk you through what I've got so far is around the topic of boundaries. Now, boundaries may not sound all that fun because it tends to be part of very much the no in our world, right? It's the what I won't do, what I won't handle, what will make me leave. At the same time, on the other side of boundaries is how we bond, how we connect. When our boundaries are well tended, we feel safe and secure. When we mind our own boundaries inside, we are more available to ourselves and to another. When we do not have an awareness of our own boundaries. So here's the deal. Boundaries is a big piece of our awareness. In order for us to become aware of our sovereignty and therefore step into it, discovering where we end and where we begin. So like where we end is one side of a boundary and where we begin is on the other side, right? And so this is a study of kind of like exploring what that line is, exploring what it is to talk about the isness of a thing and the notness of a thing. They're different languages. They're intrinsically connected. It'd be like trying to talk about the mycelial network underground in relation to the fungal bodies that pop up above the surface. One is a reflection of the other. We wouldn't have one without the other, right? So I'm going to take you on a little exploration through some slides I have been building. I don't know how long this will stay up on YouTube for. Partly this is for me to engage here in this space and have a practice with bringing all these concepts together inside of a singular container that's on a linear fashion. Very little of the things that I play with are actually a linear thing. Life is not a very linear thing, right? We put it to linearity with a watch or with devices or with how we structure our day. And yet our experience in any given moment can have such a multifaceted beingness inside of it that in and of itself is very rarely linear. So without further ado, let's dive in a little bit. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to expand this. Get this out of here. There we go. Okay. Boundaries, bondings, and blow-ups. This is an exploration of boundary types, attachment styles, and reaction awarenesses. Maybe a little less on the reaction awareness part. That's the piece that I'm still building in, though I may talk about it some. So I want you just to look for a moment at this picture. Boundaries. It's sitting at the boundary point between the heavens, the sky, where the sun is, and that water line in the picture that we're looking at, right? There's that water line there. That is a boundary line, though that is not a boundary where you could say, you know, the sun is touching the waters, and yet you see the sunlight bouncing off the waters. So this is a very poignant way of exploring intrinsic boundaries, personal boundaries, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, ethereal, land-based, so many kinds of boundaries. When we look at the boundary here in front, between bondings and blow-ups, we see the waves coming and crashing in on the shore. That's creating a bond and a connection between the sand and the earth and the water as the two of them become interlaced, interfused, interwoven for this period of time that this tide is washing up on shore. And blow-ups, what is a blow-up except a movement, a displacement of a thing? We may find ourselves displaced either further into ourselves when we're in relationship, because often being in relationship will send us back into our own personal work, our past, our languaging, our beliefs, our thought processes, our emotional reactivity and or our emotional resilience, our soul's growth trajectory. We might spend our part of our whole life being this very sort of sober person to hit a mark at one point and become a very different kind of being. We might swing the other way as well. We might remain in this constance throughout our life. How we shape and move with the things that happen is what has a great deal of effect in our world. This starts with honoring the realities of ourselves and each other. Thank you, JWoww, for bringing the realities where we get to explore what is real for each being or set of beings, right? We can often have multiplicity within our own sense of being, and that gets to be honored as a reality as well. It means the adventure and the exploration gets to be that much more involved. We get to give it that much more attention and time. We get to center on the things that nourish, and we get to hold at the edges the things that are that energy of no and keep away, right? When we structure and prioritize with the honoring of our realities, with ourselves and each other, this is that coming into honoring boundaries, honoring how we each are, right? We reduce the ability to weaponize our truths when we honor the realities of ourselves and each other. Let's do more of that, eh? Okay, for a moment here, I want to talk just a little bit. There's another video here in my YouTube. I believe it's entitled Language of Relating. This is a layer of that. So for every person, we look at at least these three basic categories. And remember, multitudes can exist in any category. We have our conscious personality. So we have the thing that we are aware of. We have our awareness of how we see, hear, think about, talk about ourselves. Then we have our body, and our body, this skin suit, right? Some might call it a meat sack, a skin suit, a skin temple, however which way you may want to refer to it. I prefer the honoring sorts of ways. It helps me to tune in and tend it better, tend it well. Our body, our design, our vehicle that we are moving through this world with has its own set of things that it wants and craves and feels and is existing with. And what we get to do is follow this vessel with this awareness of ourselves and what we think we're out here doing. And following this body, this personality gets to arrive where we're going. So it's a way for a yes and then this one here in the center, subconscious soul spirit. So I call this subconscious here because it's a little even deeper than unconscious. It's not even a thing that well, for some of us, we can hear and talk and seek and see sing to our soul spirits. We can call it forth. We can see our unconscious body, depending on how we become aware of it. Some can, some can't, some are not yet. I invite the honoring of the human within, the human and the divine. The way you think about yourself, this skin suit vessel you're being in, and the soul spirit part of you. Because when we look at those three things, we are moving out of the binary of me versus you. And now we're looking at, oh, this part of me, this part of me, and this part of me. Okay, now I'm already looking at three different aspects of myself, which means then I also get to turn that around and look at three different aspects for another. So it helps to get us out of this place of being stuck between black and white, this and that, good and bad. And instead, we get to look at things for how they are. And we get to ask and be taught by those whose realities it is, rather than making assumptions. And it first starts with how we talk and listen to ourselves. Do we make assumptions on ourselves? How do we talk to ourselves? How are we in that relationship? Self-awareness starts with ourselves at this point, right? This unconscious being body is this meat suit temple skin that is here to simply exist in this world, is drawn to what it's drawn to, has energy to work with what it has energy for. When we honor that body and use discernment, follow our internal authority, this is a delve into our self-awareness. What is the awareness you can find for what your body is calling, craving, needing? What it wants is not the end game, for the record. It's a starting point. Conscious personality, the you who talks, the things, right? So this is a recap here. I don't need to keep going through this. I'm going to skip this slide here. What we resist persist. Just a little tiny nudge that there are many ways and multiplistic avenues through which we can present. We could change this around and have this external figure instead of this blue beast monster type being. We could have the very well pulled together businessman or businesswoman, and we could put a beast inside of them or a wounded child inside of them, right? We could put whatever combination could possibly exist where we have something that we are oppressing, resisting, in order to whatever. Well, what is this story here in front of us? Why is this little boy wounded? Why is the little boy wounded by himself? Why is there no one comforting him? Why is there anger instead of care? It's a whole story. Little boy probably has a story, and so does this blue being. We get to look in multiple places. It's an inside job first, right? So this is an internal parts study worksheet. Looks like a little bit of this is cut off at the bottom. Nope. Okay. So when we're needing to have conversations inside of ourself, right? You might be a being who has refined itself into where it has clearly differentiated parts that one could sit down and have a conversation with, right? A younger child or a teenager or an adult or sets of beings. You might not have that much differentiation. There is no goal in this process. There's simply working with what you have, what is present for you. If you have no sense of differentiation, perhaps consider that most beings have a younger side, have an older side, have a side that is not their gender, have a side that is their gender that might be older or younger than they are, that is there in support of and or is still trying to catch up in their learnings and understandings. So If you're needing to have a conversation inside of yourself about something that's going on, then it's kind of like having a conversation with one part and then the other part's feeling a different way. And you're trying to get a sense of what both parties want out of the deal. And yes, both those parties in this case might be in your own head, right? And there might be something that is there wanting safety and security, and one that is wanting experience and connection and freedom. And so then you have this chosen negotiated relationship that is what gets chosen out of the other two categories, the other two aspects, the other two parts inside of your being. And that involves a speaking and a listening of each of the quadrants that are going on, right? How else are we going to be able to have an understanding of what's alive, right? We can't make a choice if we don't know the details. Okay, so first that's the inside job. Now we're taking a peek at this from the perspective of it being two people. So two sets of being spheres, right? So imagine each one of them might need to have that inside job conversation first. Now they come in person A and person B, right? And so there's those three sets of spheres with each one of them because they're listening to themselves. Now they're also needing to make a practice of listening and speaking to the other. And then they're also going to be, as they get to know each other, forming whatever connections, bonds, understandings that get developed through their relating become something that they have as their relationship, right? A relationship is the action of relating, and relating over and over again, where you choose to keep coming together and you choose to keep relating, develops a relationship. And so here we look at the AB as being the product of their relationship. Now, it only has two parts, right? It doesn't have a body. It has the energy that you put into it, and it has its own energy that moves, and it has its own personality, like the way a couple looks and is when they walk in a room or when they are of service to people or when they're fighting. And then there's also how their energy is, right? And so that's kind of what that AB is looking at up there, is this the combined essence. And that is a combination of how both people hold that space. Do they hold space for that relationship to be? Do they hold that space in a balanced way? Do they hold it in an imbalanced way? Is it transparent? Is it negotiated? Is it agreed to? And these are all different kinds of conversations that get to be had as one's exploring their boundaries. This is another little worksheet that's for two different people, right? We've got a person on one side and the other down here, and then the relationship up here. And so what you're hearing in yourself, what you're hearing in the other, and what it is that you're sorting out and agreeing to as you work together. And this page simply goes, so if you want to have three people in on the conversation, here's a sense of the lines of listening and talking that are happening. Can get quite involved. All right, so boundaries. Boundaries, as far as a description and a function goes, boundaries are the spaces that we need to love ourselves and the other well. Right, Moose? Right. Thank you, dear. How we go about doing that is when we bring forward a concept of something that is not working well for us. Second, I'm going to pause this. Put this out. Okay, I think that worked all right. There we go. All right. Let's try this again. Let's talk about a little vocabulary. Boundaries. As a description and in an exploration of its function, boundaries is the space that I need for me to love myself and you well at the same time. It's also an action. It's a how, meaning as a how, it implies that it is that if XYZ happens, I will do blah, right? In a sense of protecting oneself, not offensive at the other, right? That would be something different than boundaries. So boundaries is not, let me talk just for a moment about what it is not that I see all over in the world. I want to be treated this way. That's my boundary. Boundaries have nothing to do with how you ask someone to treat you. It's not about an asking. It's about a saying this, right? It might not even be a saying. It might be a leaving a room or leaving a situation. Sometimes we speak volumes by saying nothing, by not giving it our energy at all, by leaving a situation and not offering anything into it. That is a stronger boundary than demanding how one gets treated. Demanding how one gets treated is more of an immature response. It's more of an immature boundary. And we often learn by doing just that and then moving into embodying the boundary where we explain our world more with our actions than our language. I like explaining my behavior with language, especially before it happens, and especially if it's something that is going to potentially have a harsh impact on someone. I try my best to have disclaimers right up front. If you go to my website or you come inside of Alchemy, the Season School, there are these different disclaimers, and even with the mountain. I'm aware that I'm a very blunt kind of being. We each get to be who and how we are. And when we come with disclaimers, we come with the communications of how we can best be respected. And we can get on to the process of being able to play and build together in even more greater ways. Boundaries as far as a reason. Okay, well, let me go here for a second. Our boundaries represent the outline of our 3x3 at least turf that we get to experience this life in, right? 3x3 is kind of small, actually. I'd like to be able to have at least as far as I can reach, and in some places, that's not possible. So let's be realistic. The reason, the rationale is that we get to be able to have freedom, right? Boundaries can also support, so it can offer a value of being able to, where our boundaries create space for others as well. We get to support and provide a sense of safety for others who have similar boundaries as our own, or who have a hard time using their boundaries. Both of those things can be supportive. An application in practicality, communicating one's boundaries, becoming strong inside to be able to follow through on said boundary and to keep one's heart open in other healthy, aligned ways. Oof, this is huge. This application, this practicality piece of boundaries, this is where things get rough. This is where it's like putting the pedal to the metal, right? The communication of your boundaries. And then being strong enough to follow through. Remember, what boundaries are is that if something happens, you're going to do something. And so that's that follow through of doing the thing you said you were going to do. And to keep one's heart open in other healthy, aligned ways. We tend to close down our hearts when we get hurt. And the older we get and the more hurt we get, or the more alone we are, the more isolated we feel in this world, the more our heart starts to become constricted and closed down. And that doesn't serve our beingness either, you know? Attachments, bondings. Okay, so this is the last one of the boundaries. On the other side of boundaries is our ability to attach. It's our ability to connect. What our boundaries are in actuality will also reflect as our attachment type and the resulting bonding that we will attract. If you don't like what you're attracting, check your boundaries. Seriously. If your boundaries are uncomfortable, look at what you're attracting, right? You can look at either one of those things and go, what is the reality of this? And we're going to delve into some little bit of exploration of how we can break down these boundaries into four, 6, and more ways of looking at them and differentiating them so we can start to see and map what does our boundary system look like. Quick swig. Let's see where we're at next. This is a boundaries multi-docs. Thank you, Ronnie Jean Andrews Neo, for bringing multi-doxes into the world, which is a way of looking at sets of stacked lenses of entire warehouses, if you will, of information. So where boundaries can serve. Boundaries can serve, let me just walk you through what this means. For and from yourself. We can have boundaries for ourselves. We can have boundaries for things that we will allow from ourselves towards others and from others towards us. Things we will allow ourselves to receive from others and things that we will allow ourselves to do to, with, for others, right? And we can do this for self-protection. We can do this for self-growth. And most specifically, physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, in our service, we are deeply involved in exploring what it is where I end and where something else begins. We can do it to protect our connections, our family connections, our community connections, our business connections. This is how we support. We don't know what the boundaries are unless we have this deep understanding, this deep exploration between these two. We can have boundaries to protect a code. We can have boundaries in order to help and support guiding a trajectory. We can be guiding trajectories in the trenches when things are going south. We can do it in the gardens. We can do it in the boardrooms. We can do it in the classrooms. We can do it at events. So in guardianship, and thank you, Jay Well, for that terminology and that pocket of information as well. Guardianship, in the way I have come to understand it, is a guardianship aspect that is also about how one is guiding with their warehouse of knowledge and experiences into what can be a safe way of moving forward through these various things. Safe way of moving forward or effective way of applying a mission. There's a multitude of different ways that one can look through it through the lens. Safety, boundaries in regards to safety. So here we're talking about sovereign awareness for, from, everyone. Thank you. Right? And you'll see up here, that concept is rooted in Planet JWoww as well. When we look at safety as the perspective of sovereign awareness for yourself, from yourself, for others, from others, right? That becomes a whole way that you can explore how boundaries applies for your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, energetic safety, where safety is based in your own sovereignty that comes from your own developing awareness with yourself and with others. Now we're talking about a whole different kind of conversation. Okay, this is the full map, and there's a lot of pieces and parts. This is kind of just to give you a brief overview. Notice that it's broken down into 4 basic quadrants. You'll see on the outer walls, there's different kinds of boundaries, right? You'll see in opposition, we've got rigid boundaries, and we've got porous boundaries, and we've got boundaries on the output, and we've got boundaries on the input. Where we have rigid boundaries, we have dismissive bonding. Where we have porous boundaries, it's enmeshment based, right? So, and you'll see the little dotted lines here. So that is where there's a porousness, there's an enmeshment, where instead of 2 beings being like this and having space between where they can connect, enmeshment is when you become enmeshed in each other like this, and it's difficult to see where one ends and the other begins. And that's not necessarily inherently dangerous. It's simply that this is not this, right? And rigid boundaries is where it's like 2 tight fists that all they can ever do is bang into each other. They cannot soften into each other, right? And so we're looking for this kind of balance between multiple spectrums. We'll talk a little bit more later about there's a mapping and a drawing out that we can do and use with this process. When it comes to boundaries on the output and boundaries on the input, we're talking on one end, boundaries on the output is about the energy that's moving out, right? And so that's that kind of anxious attachment style where this energy of moving towards another. And in that process, it's about learning containment. It's about learning what it takes to hold to ourselves well, hold on to ourselves, to have a control. I don't like that word. And in this moment, it's the best word that I've got. Regulation might be another, like when we learn how to regulate our emotions, that's the kind of control that I'm speaking about, right? And so that containment is a plus or minus, right? It goes up and it goes down. Where on the other side, the boundaries on the input side, that boundaries on the input, so now that is about people's energies moving into you. And so that's the avoidant type of bonding style, as I put it here, because that is the moving away. You don't want people's energy coming into you, right? It's safer to be away. And so that energy is all about protection. Okay. So we're gonna keep going a little deeper here. Yep, that's all a lot. So let's break it down into some pieces. So one of the pieces I am breaking it down into a place where we can meet and go back up. So if you're reading the first couple lines and you're rolling your eyes, bear with me. In seeking to build a bridge between dichotomous ways of being, or black and white duality, and move it more into a model three ways of looking at things or more, I'm starting to look at it through the lenses of boundaries and polarities. Okay, so let's first start with polarities. Polarity is duality, right? Polarity is a this and a that, a positive and a negative. It is 2 magnets that stick together that you can pull apart, and you can feel their field between them. And if I flip these 2 magnets around, I can feel that field pushing back. That's a kind of a boundary. Well, we have a boundary because of a polarity. We have the boundaries because we have polarities, because we're here in 3-dimensional world space-time in skin suits, right? There's a whole process there that I think on a certain level, our beingness doesn't quite understand. I think that's how we get to the feminine and the masculine. I am not talking about gender here. I am also not talking about sexuality here. I am talking about the receptive and the penetrative principles. I am talking about receptivity, receiving. I'm talking about action-based, moving forward, penetrative, I'm talking about open and peripheral and taking in. I'm talking about strategic and focused and aimed outward, right? And with both of those, we're looking at the kinds of boundaries that can exist with either one of them. So on this top part here, we have, again, the dotted lines, right, on both sides. And so that's a porous boundary. And we can have porous on the output and porous on the input. Just like down here, we can have rigid, rigid on the input, rigid on the output. And so we get to explore both of them when it comes to penetrativeness and receptivity, femininity and masculinity. When we explore those principles through this porous, rigid, in and out, how are we in that place, in that process? And remember, we all can have feminine and masculine elements. We can all have porous and rigid input and out. We can have all of them all at the same time to varying degrees. And yes, they are changeable. This part of things is very changeable. There are some places in this inner cartography world that I would say it is helpful if we look at them in a sort of fixed way. And there are other things that are helpful if we do not. And this is one of those ones where it is very quite flexible. Okay, so just a little tiny piece on boundaries and nope walls, right? You're going to hear me talk a lot, especially when I move into the touchstone discussion realm. You'll hear me talk about nope walls. Nope walls, that is a piece of languaging that roots from Ryan Jean Andrews Neal's World and Harnessing Intent, where she talks about how important it is, they talk about how important it is to look at and find and take a note of where your nope walls are in regards to how you can work with the intentionality that you are seeking to harness, right? When we look at our boundaries on the input and we realize that our nope wall might look like XYZ on the outside to others, that can be helpful in our communicating to others what they might expect. Being aware that our boundaries on the inside can feel like velvet as opposed to steel bars may have us leaning into our boundaries a little bit more, as they are the things that are helping us to be exactly where we are and to love it, to accept where we are and how we are. And that there might even be a depth to the way in which we have a boundary or a nope wall. And that difference may change over time. It may change with the kinds of people we are around and the kinds of things that we are exposed to. So our boundaries can damage ourselves and each other. When we have boundaries that are porous on the output, right up here, porous on the output, we can damage others with our own penetrativeness. We can also damage ourselves on the input when we aim those sorts of things at ourselves. So, for example, when we allow porous on the input is when we allow other people's stuff, things, realities, thoughts, beliefs, emotions, their isness, their stories, their stuff to come in and eclipse our world, either by us forgetting about taking care of ourselves or getting distracted and not feeding ourselves food, losing whole chunks of our life or our time by being with another. And that can be kind of scary, right? It's like, oh, well, we do become different people when we are around others. And so this damage gets to be explored. Is this a damage that is irrevocable? Is this a damage that is a challenge? Is this a so we get to honor the damage that exists, and we also get to honor that damage is part of life. I could change this word damage to many different kinds of things. I could say that it's a growth inducing. If we are growth inducing on others without their consent, that is called abuse. If we allow things to ourselves, that can also be abusive to ourselves. So it's a matter of degrees, right? Let's move over to the next one. Rigid on the input and rigid on the output. Rigid on the input can hurt yourself by you not allowing yourself to feel love, to be loved, to be able to bring your gifts into the world. Rigid on the output, if you are in a relationship with someone, if this is someone who is in your family, or you are deep friends with a person who becomes very rigid on the output, meaning they don't give themselves out, both of those pieces can be a little bit more, they can have their own sense of damaging. The one that tends to get the baddest rep is the porous on the output, generally speaking. Porous on the, or rigid on the input can also, because they don't listen to other people. They don't hear other people's stories. They don't hear the effects of what their actions might do. And so the healthy side of things is where there's a level of discernment. Sometimes some things can enter. Wow. Telling them coyotes off. Wow. Okay. So all of this boundary side of things. We're just going to touch base just for a moment on this safety, little deeper delve into JWoww's formula here. Sovereign awareness for from everyone. What can it mean to feel safe in this world? It's so true that we cannot make everything safe. In that way, safety is an absolute illusion. There are things we can do to become aware and choose accordingly where we can. CAN is a little acronym word for choose action now. Thank you, JWoww. So we get to look at where we can choose. What actions can we take? And where is the now? Is it a now? Is it a soon now? Is it a later now? Right? All these different layers of where can we? Sovereign. Sovereign is owning your own personal power. It's looking at from one end of spectrum to another of what it took to not exist, to continue to be here, to build safety for yourself, to build security for yourself, and then to be sovereign in your own world. And to be sovereign in your own world is a deep part of awareness, becoming conscious and wise with yourself and others' sovereignty, right? What is aligned? What can be aligned? For and from. This is considerations for what you need for yourself and what others need from you. And I'm going to expand that beyond that a little bit because I found another yummy layer. For yourself and from yourself. For others and from others. You want to receive this kind of respect from others, and you're willing to give this kind of respect to others, for an example, right? So that for from gets to be a way that we look at our own responsibility and accountability, and we also get to sit in tandem in presence and hand holding, be withing with the responsibility and accountability with another. And that's super deep, right? So we talk about sovereign awareness for from everyone. So that's just the word safe right there. Sovereign awareness for from everyone. Everyone is where we each get to choose who our everyone is that we get to consider. Now that might be the everyone that you choose, like how you choose your friends. That might be how you choose people you work with. That might be how you choose projects and missions that you can align with to work well with. This can be what kinds of missions you work with. This can be how you choose to, what you choose to call part of your culture. What culture do you belong to? What do you live yourself into being? What we choose is a very powerful thing. When we choose who our everyone is, right? I can't love everyone. I can't love 8 billion people. I can't remember that many names. Let's get real. What I can do is I can say that I can love And I can have a set of behaviors that I choose to use when people show up inside of my world. I can choose to be very honest and blunt. I can choose to have deep support where I can. And in this next one, I can discover what can be appreciated that also delights, right? So this, in this gratitude process, this thanks process, discovering what can be appreciated. Sometimes it's appreciating because you're seeing someone's ass walk out the door. Sometimes you're having deep appreciation for the isness of their being that brought them to your world in that moment in time with that set of history and that set of connections that they brought with them to help you understand something you might never have seen before. And that can be a delightful thing. It can even be a delight to watch someone's ass walk out the door and go, wow, I learned my lesson on that one. That one only took 2 weeks instead of 2 years, right? We can find gold anywhere we really want to look. And then the last one, you. This is where it gets to be all about your evolutionary journey. It's so deeply part of each of our own personal journey that if we try to make it not about our journey, we've kind of missed the point. So that is our sum up for safety. Boundaries. Okay, so we explored safety in regards to boundaries. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about how boundaries show up in our bodies. When we are moving through life in an easy, happy, go lucky sort of way, we're in this ventral vagal state. So polyvagal talks about 3 different states. It's this, look at this, these 3 boxes like the rungs of a ladder. The highest rung of the ladder is safe and social. And we can fall down this ladder, and where this middle range is where we've got our fight and flight system, right? And if we fall down that ladder again, now we've moved down into this collapsed state, right? So you could say fight, flight. You could say freeze and fawn down here in the dorsal vagal state. The process with looking at it in this what they call polyvagal tone is this study of the vagus system, the vagus nerve, that vagus process that runs through. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much depth here. What I'm mostly wanting to look at is this slide in the body side of things, where we get to explore how boundaries around and in our world, how we can pay attention to our bodies in regards to our boundaries, right? So let's say we're going along and we have a healthy, happy, regular heart rate. We've got good blood pressure. We've got happy digestion. We're sleeping well, sense of well-being, healthy immune system, right? Those might be our boundaries are feeling pretty good. Not always the case. Sometimes we can have very tricky nervous systems that feel better when we have something that might not actually be good for us. That's a little bit deeper. We get into that a little bit more in the advanced classes and sessions. Here in the sympathetic state, this might be a little bit more when, generally speaking, when our boundaries are being threatened, right? Faster heart rate, higher blood pressure, difficulty sleeping, memory problems, headaches, chronic neck and back issues. This is a tension, a constriction in the body, right? Must move, must take action. Fight, flight, escape, run, nothing is safe, no one can be trusted. Fear is speaking, and I feel its powerful message. Our emotions in the body, which is what these are speaking about here, are giving us a clue of how our system is responding to stress, where our boundaries might be being intruded upon, and where we might need to set up a little bit more of a system for ourselves to process. Down here in the dorsal vagal state, we have disassociation. This is problems with memory, depression, isolation, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, stomach problems, digestive issues. We can have a slower pulse. The pulse and the blood pressure can be up or down depending on where we are. And this is about not moving, not reacting outside of our of the places where we feel safe. It's not a place where we can be bold and be brave. right? And so maybe in those places, we really need boundaries. And that down here, this dorsal vagal state can be the place where it is the hardest to have boundaries. And it may be where we need it the most. All right. Let's go. Wanna go back outside? Come on. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about these four. Here we start with porous on the output. So I've loosely grouped these into the four different categories, and I'm doing my best to like share a series of different lenses of how to look through, of ways to look through that can give us a broad glimpse of each of these types. Porous on the output. Okay, so this is a being sphere here at the center of its aura, right? Its energy field, and its energy field is porous, the dotted lines. And you see here at the center where his monopole, his center being of existence is, we have this energy that is radiating out, and it's moving way far beyond the bounds of his aura. So we've got this porous on the output. Affecting everything. Their need, let's extrapolate for a moment what the need could be inside of this being. The need to feel valuable through making things better, through solving other people's problems, feeling that they are supporting another person. Their behaviors might be giving unasked for advice or advice where a person isn't quite willing to receive it in that moment. That person might be asking for it, and they might not also be able to put it anywhere. They might be someone who crosses or ignores other boundaries. They might force their own reality on another through subtle or overt manipulations, right? So we can have spectrums from trying really hard to honor, and yet the other person it's not able to make a good connection through, all the way to overt manipulation, right? We're talking about spectrums of kinds of behaviors here. Insensitivity to others' words and or body language, overgiving, love bombing, constant correction. Right? So there's a lot of different ways in which this energy that is reaching out into other people's reality might look like, right? Their behaviors. And they may be doing this because they lack a sense of other people's realities. Maybe they weren't supported in their own reality growing up. And maybe they feel they're entitled to do to others as they please. This can transmit a sense of entitlement. It can transmit a loud declaration of who you are and that you deserve better, which can be a good thing, right? These sorts of things can be helpful, and they can also be things that are detrimental, because we walk around with a me sense of entitlement that's not necessarily going to land well in other people's realities. The effects on others can be feeling of being intruded upon, or intruding. It can be oversharing. The other person could feel exhausted, could feel like that person's inserting their self into their world. It can feel assumptive. It can feel arrogating. This is a rescuer. So some of the mentalities and the overarching themes are up here in the corners. Rescuers, overgivers, needing to be needed, myth. If I don't help them, no one will. Healing. So there's, right, porous on the output. Ooh, porous on the output. Porous on the output. Over receiving and healing might need to go on different slides. Porous on the output. Porous on the input. Over receiving. Affected by everything. Affecting. Over receiving. Over receiving. Over receiving. Okay, yeah, that one's a mistake. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, porous on the input. Here we're looking at over receiving. Over on this side, it would have been, whoops, over giving. This would be, oh, porous on the output would be over giving. Porous on the input is over receiving. Affected by everything. Okay, right. So now we're going to reverse everything. We're gonna draw all the arrows of anyone's opinions, anyone's thoughts, feelings, emotions, their own life's needs, their own soul's journey, and we're going to aim it all at the self. And this way of being takes everything in. It is fragility. It's our white fragility. It's also where we are fragile with anything, and any of us can be fragile. It can also be where we are self-obsessed. It can also be where we're still healing, right? It can be where we're hurt and where we're wounded and where we haven't built up enough resiliency to be able to withstand it. It can be people pleasing. It can also be straight up receiving, right? In order to receive healing, you kind of need to allow yourself to be porous on the input, to allow something other than your own thoughts to come into your head, to allow something else. So there's a lot of avenues in which we get to look at this process. Here, we're talking about the need to feel secure and in your own skin, to feel that they matter. And they may do this by mimicking others, by trying on and becoming like another being, like another person, as they're trying to figure out what pieces and parts might be helpful and supportive in their world. Their behaviors, this may be where they are easily offended. They get hurt or put out when someone has a problem with them. They can have a possessive reactivity to them. They can have a cold and judgy feel to them. They might do this and might behave this way because they're unaware that life's not only about them, or they might be aware of it, and that's how it feels, is that life is all about how their body's feeling. They're overwhelmed, swamped by the sensations involved in being alive. You know, it's where they mean something of value and of worth, and they haven't quite been able to put it into action yet. This can transmit to other people a one-sided kind of a story, a woe is me, a self-centricness, a lacking of a boundaries, and it can sometimes feel unsafe to connect for other folks. And this is not to it's not in any way to put down those who are in a place of taking too much in, right? They're taking a lot in. Well, like if someone is so porous on the input that they take everything personally in the world, then some of the best ways to not influence them is to step away from them and give them space. Some of our biggest life lessons of awakening is coming to realize what kind of being we are when we are completely by ourselves. For some people, that's really hard to do. It's really hard for them to be with themselves. It can feel very unwell, not great feeling. And for other people, it can not feel well to be around others, right? These are some of the places where looking into human design and or gene keys and the resonance square, astrology, cardology, the practical mapping orientations in the inner cartography world that I work with can give us these clues around, open spleen may not feel great when they're by themselves, may feel better around defined spleens, physically feeling more well around other people with that definition. At the same time, they won't necessarily be able to cultivate that deep sensitivity if they're also not aware of what is their body's reactions and what is someone else's reactions. And so having deep alone time where they learn what that feels like while getting to be in relationship where they also feel good can be a very helpful thing, right? So finding these ways of understanding how we can transmit these certain things and what that means about us. It's not that we're a bad person or that there's, we're only ever going to hurt people. Looking at it in that kind of perspective is not going to be a helpful thing, generally speaking. Some of the effects that we can have on the other in this porous on the input state is that we can blame the other when something happens that they don't like. We can feel victimized by the other, right? This being on the inside here can feel awfully victimized by all those arrows that are crossing the threshold of their auric world and coming straight at the center of who they are. In some ways, it can be rather hard to not take that personally. And where we are responsible and where we get to become aware is all of what's involved in this dotted oval all the way around, just meant to represent that sort of auric field around ourselves. And so the more we learn about what's happening in this space between our physical body and our auric field, the more empowered into our own reality we're going to come into being. Rigid on the output. All right. So now we've switched gears. Now we're looking at rigid, right? Rigid on the output, and then the last slide with this sequence will be rigid on the input, and I might wind it there for the evening. Rigid on the output, under receiving, right? We're not allowing anything out, under receiving. Hold on one second. They're both of them say under receiving. Darn it. Okay. Those are two errors that I have to, under receiving. Under giving, because it's nothing's coming out. Nothing's leaving this space, right? Refusal to affect anything. So this can also be bypassing, ignoring, restraining, resisting. This can be you can be a dismissive partner or a friend or a parent in this way. You can also be someone who's learning how to moderate your energetic comportment, learning how to hold yourself well, right? So perhaps you were an overly porous person, a porous on the output, and you're learning how to rein in whatever it is that you might be needing to rein in. And this need involved here is for it to be safe out there, to be who they are in here. Safety and trust in life. That's what they're needing. They might also need a good set of boundaries. It's possible too. Behaviors, low tolerance to change. Spelling error there. Things not going their way. They can be swift to shut down. It's also a lot going on in there. So it's a lot of tension, a lot of things bouncing around. And they might do this because life taught them a way and they don't want or have a hard time in changing that way. Might have PTSD, CPTSD, trauma, certain neurodiversities, right? They're shielding, they're masking, they're not sharing the things out in the world that might get them ridiculed or mocked or not understood. This rigid on the output can transmit a need to take care of themselves, not sharing myself with you. It can also transmit frustration or annoyance when one is not connecting in with a situation at all. It can imply things. Doesn't always mean that it's true. The effects on the other, lack of transparency can build distrust that erodes relationships, right? Rigid on the output really isn't necessarily anyone else's personal business unless they're in relationship with you, right? When they're in relationship, this lack of movement, this lack of sharing and giving and transparency and all that is what can erode relationships. It can uphold personal boundaries also while one is trying to find clarity. Living a secret life is a very one-sided game. And so this is kind of like a little bit like living a secret life. Now, here's the thing. For some people, this would be a prison sentence. This could feel like a prison sentence. For others, this could feel like the safest thing in the world. There's a level of responsibility that we each have to how we affect others' realities and how we affect our own. This is the kind of one that can eat you up on the inside. There's also the kind of one that if we don't have the ability to have a rigid on the output, we can potentially lean too far into one of the porous ones, porous on the output, and become penetrative in a sense, in a way that is harmful. Right? So studying the different ways that we can do harm can be just as important as understanding how we can become connected to things and develop strong, healthy attachments to them. Right? Studying our yeses and our nos from a individual level, from a community level, and hopefully from a cultural level. Rigid on the input. Let's talk about this one. Rigid on the input. So now we've got this being, we've got his little auric field here, and he's not allowing any influence in. No influence is allowed to affect him. He gets to live in his own little world, all by its lonesome. This one can be dangerous as well. You'll see up here, I've labeled this one colonialism, gray rocking, patriarchy, holding one's sovereignty solid. Gray rocking is when you don't really give anything away to someone else while you're in conversation. It's keeping conversation short and to the point, kind of neutral. You're refusing to be affected by anything, right? So that can be really helpful when someone's trying to get your goat, when someone's trying to be an asshole at you. You've got someone who's narcissistically trying to like get under your skin. It's not helpful when you're trying to see and feel someone. It's not helpful when someone's telling you that you've hurt their feelings, right? And if you are rigid on the input and you don't allow yourself to be affected by them telling you that you're somehow hurting them, it's like, oof. And remember, we also have places and spaces where people can use that way of speaking and that way of being for something that is a little bit more out controlling, manipulative, right? So knowing where we can be in this process of our boundaries is such a powerful piece. Okay, so rigid on the input. The needs here is to have things be their way, to have things be safe, to get what they want. Discernment, an outward-facing nope wall. The behaviors may look like being impenetrable, strong, reserved. It might be feeling too arrogant or unwilling or unable to listen or take in. Remember also, we get to discover how much we can take in based on what we have bandwidth for. True story. We might do this because the environment is hostile to the person. They might be arrogantly refusing to see something. They may also be trying to protect themselves. This way of being can transmit unavailability, access denied, tending own self-care. Effects on the other may leave the other feeling not heard. It may give indications of not here, not now, nope. Right? So this is drawing hard lines. This is also the way that we came in and determined with different cultures that we were going to do things our way and that they didn't know what they were doing. How dare we? Rigid on the input. We were not listening when we waltzed into certain parts of this world, back when the lands were getting settled earlier on. How we move with our boundaries with others makes a huge difference. Okay, let's see where we are after this. All right, I am not getting into that in this moment. That is a whole nother sector of things. So I'm going to skip through those. I want to get to the map. There is a map piece of here, and I want to wind down with this for the evening. Okay. This is the worksheet right here. So this worksheet, I'm gonna switch to the instructions real quick and then go back. So with that worksheet that we were just looking at, it would be helpful if you picked 3 to 5 areas of your life to consider where your boundaries exist in that relationship. Pick a number of colored pencils or markers or different colored writing utensils. Pick the same number of different colors as you have for the number of scenarios. And for each item, use the same colored pencil and place 1 dot along each of the lines in each of the quadrants that best corresponds to your boundary with that scenario. So I'm going to go back to here for a second and walk through that. So I want you to pick a scenario in your world. We're going to go here, person, situation. This could be a project that you're working on with someone. This could be a state of mind that you have with something in your world. Platforms or digital realms that you want to do something in and interact with. So groups of people inside of digital spaces. Imaginal type relationships. You can have actual relationships. You can have communal relating. You can look at roles, right? So pick a couple different scenarios. And these lenses down here, these lenses come from the Touchstone system. And I invite you to play with lenses from, you can have yourself, you can have something in relationship, partner, friend, peer-based kind of relationship. You can have powered relating, where it's like your boss or someone who is a holder of resources or someone who has a deep level of influence. You can also be looking at it from a leadership perspective, right? Charged with a caretaking of something. Mission, kind of a core group of people. So are you working at an event? Are you involved in something where there is a mission and a leadership, and then you're a person and you're part of a community, and so there's like all these different roles and hats and lanes involved, and you're trying to work with something that has a multi-sectored value. Community, collective, tribes, clans, and then 7, which is the egregore. That's the collective expression of everything. All right, so oftentimes people will pick, a person or a situation or a project that pertains to themselves or something that's in relationship. I'd recommend probably staying within these first 2 here, and then pick something, pick the couple that are here, and keep it to something that's fairly simple first, and then expand from there if you like. So let's say you have a person who you've been in relationship. Let's say you have a person who is a friend, and this is a person who, when you are in relationship with them, you don't necessarily take in a whole lot of what's involved in their world. You know what? Actually, I'm going to give an example. I built an example for this process. I'm going to walk you through an example in just a moment, because here's the rest of the ones I was looking for. I want you to look at each of these quadrants, pretty please, as being their own sphere of reality, which means they have 3 axes, multiple axes. They have we've got the axes laid out around, right? We've got the rigid boundaries, we've got the porous boundaries, we've got the outputs, we've got the inputs. And now we're also looking at, you can put in another element of time. So that would be the forward backwards part of the sphere. You could talk about it being in the past, in the future, in the now. You could also talk about it being, if the sphere is, if you're sitting here holding the sphere yourself, you could be talking about things that are a little bit more around theoretical ideas of things. And you could also be talking about cataclysmic tectonic shifts in your reality, right? And so being able to give it a third axis that parallels with what is current in your world really helps to be able to flush out how we then get to look at things from. So now as we're moving from looking at each one of them as their own individual sphere, now as we're playing with this worksheet in our minds, when we're doing the worksheet, all this stuff that's in this is not here, right? This is so you have a sense of how these 4 things work together to give you an idea of how the map of your terrain currently is with any given particular subject matter. And so here we have a version of Michelangelo's The Man in the center of this being sphere. And we see that that the lines extend outside, right? And so this map here in the center is kind of giving you a little bit of an indication that the things that fall inside this realm, so like the 3 is down, they all have this sort of like within normal parameters, so to speak, right? Here's an example of 2 sets of inputs. I actually would love to do a version of this without those red circles. Okay, anyway. So let's say these green lines was a situation where this person, let's say Bob is working at his job and he works for a computer company. And in his computer business the computer job that he works, he tends to not be very forward with his ideas and his thoughts and his offerings in his work. And he tends to holds back things that he could be offering. And what he doesn't do necessarily is really take in and listen to what's going on inside of the other people's worlds, right? So he holds back. He takes things. He takes in too much from other people, which means he probably quite a talker potentially. He doesn't, he's all right about taking input and criticism with others, and it still doesn't necessarily lead to him behaving in any more of a different way. And maybe in intruding the porous on the output, maybe he's not so much, he's not pushy with other people. He doesn't offer too much input, right? He does what he needs to do, and he goes home when it's time to go home. And so while this person and this job that he's in, this could be a layout of what that particular boundary looks like. Now let's talk about this other person that this person's in relationship with. Let's say that's a friend named Nancy. And this friend Nancy is a person who is not terribly porous on the input, doesn't really take in other people's thoughts and opinions, tends to block things from other people, doesn't really listen to others, is not very restraining of themselves. They're not, they don't hold back. And what they actually do is they actually intrude a lot into other people's reality, doing a lot of harm to the relationship. Right? And so we get to look and explore here where these different range of boundaries, these 4s out here might be a range of, hey, this is harmful behavior. Let's take a look at these and go a little deeper, right? The things that are kind of more on the inside of the circle here with the 3s, that's a little bit more of a balanced way of being with the process. If we're looking at some of the extremes, right? The extremes would be the things that are really close and tight in the middle and really far on the edges and on the outside. So kind of like the 1s and the 5s. Right? So allowing your eyes to move through and see what it's telling you. So all of that, I think that's, okay, yep, that was into that one. Going back to this, that's simply an explanation one where you see it kind of laid out in a very simple way. This is the actual one that is a worksheet. I actually want to turn this into, this is going to be a part of the in relationship workbook. And anybody who would like this slide as a sheet to do this on for yourself, that you print off and do for yourself, let me know and I will add it into the comments or add into the description of this video. I look forward to hearing how things pan out in all yours worlds with playing with this. And I think I'm gonna one last piece. Oops, I guess I'd have to go through all of these. So lenses and touchstones. When I'm talking about inner cartography, this is an this is a picture of the inner cartography matrix. This is 3 of the systems. So there's human design, there's I Ching, there's the gene key spectrums, and you're just seeing part of it, right? This is it goes to all 64 inner cartography matrix. I make a lot of different matrices of information so that we can have deeper conversations while being able to keep track of data. So this is more of like the internal workings of things, where this touchstone matrix is more about how we interface and relate with other people outside. Here it's exploring sovereign awareness, communication, and agency. And awareness is first, because the way I look at it is that awareness is a foundation stone to us arriving at an understanding of our sovereignty. And this looks at things from the self, the leadership, the event core, and community. So it looks at 4 of the 7 layers. You can actually see the poster on my back wall up there. That is this version here as well. And then this last page is these are all of the people that were a part of this building process. I actually don't have everybody on here because there's some guys that are part of the Nematon side of things that have been super helpful in proofing some of this process, and they're not in here yet either. Brandon Neil Thomas and Ian. I'm drawing a blank on Ian's name at the moment. Ian Ohm. So yeah, I'm gonna come out to here and wind down here in a moment. My goodness, it did get a little bit late. If anybody actually makes it through all this, I deeply honor and appreciate you. I'm looking forward to breaking this down into chunkable sized videos and having different conversations with them all. Thank you very much for your presence, and may this fly free and support to the world. And I look forward to hearing feedback where it comes up. All right, beautifuls. Have a wonderful evening. Until soon.